Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I am your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I want to welcome to the show Josh Hanford. He is the Director of Intergovernmental Relations for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns in Montpelier. So glad you're here with us today, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We were joking before we started recording, kind of the mouthful that is your title and the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, but I think it is a precursor to talk about all the handful that municipalities are dealing with these days in Vermont. Quickly, let's remind people what the Vermont League of Cities and Towns does.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, we're a member organization, all 251 municipalities in Vermont. So all the cities and towns, villages are members. We've been around since 1967. We're nonpartisan. Our role is to really assist municipalities in a number of different spaces and areas. Obviously, in advocacy and legislation policy work, which is what I do at the state house and the federal level. We provide education and training and data research. We provide like recruitment services for municipalities. We're also the largest insurer for all but two municipalities in the state.
Huh, I didn't know
Get
that.
insurance through us, so we insure the buildings and the roads that the public use. So a lot of different services, and we try to be, a voice, a common voice for municipalities, really of all shapes and sizes in the state.
Thank you for that rundown. Yeah, one thing I always appreciate about VLCT is your training and education.
We do
Um,
lots of training and education. Yep.
and I don't think it can be discounted at all because I feel running a municipality, even serving on a select board, like that's hard to just walk into cold off the street, which a lot of folks who graciously run and volunteer their time, that's essentially what they do is they kind of walk in cold with a passion and a desire, but the skill set's different.
Yeah, and people that aren't involved in municipal government or sort of know the ins and outs might not, realize that municipal government is really all the things that the federal government and the state government does at the local level. We're responsible for all those same things.
Hmm.
Every service, every infrastructure, it's all delivered at the local level. And so in Vermont, probably I think it's about 73% of the municipalities are below 2,500 in population. And so it's largely volunteers running our communities, and they're responsible from everything, water and sewer and labor relations. We have employees, we have roads, we have all the same concerns that you see at those much larger levels of government.
Yes, definitely. Well, on that note, as we've started the new legislative session and a new calendar year, what are you hearing from municipalities as we're going into 2026?
Yeah, well, it's been very busy at the State House this year, the 2 weeks in, I must say, compared to last year. Last year, sort of the new biennium, lots of new legislators and chairs. It took a few weeks before things got really busy, like what were going to be the priorities. Not the case this year. Since day one, it has been fast and furious. Myself and my colleague Samantha, we've already testified 10 times, twice a day in some cases. And so
Jeez.
there's a lot of interest, a lot of bills. Um, but there's, a big sort of cloud looming out there, really, that is, what do we have for money, the affordability sort of issues, the crisis in Vermont, and not per se a municipal issue. We
Hmm.
don't necessarily weigh in on this as a policy, but education and education reform, because, like it or not, the property taxes, most of your property tax bill that comes from a municipality is about 70% goes to the statewide property tax education, but the
Mm,
municipalities are charged with collecting that.
right.
And so, um, decades in the making, it really feels to municipalities that they've got no room left in property tax budget to do anything. In fact, they're cutting
Mm,
budgets. They're really under pressure from their taxpayers, their voters, not to do anything that would impact or sort of increase that property tax burden. And so what you have municipalities facing right now in budget discussions. I mean, I was just reading articles last night about really tough conversations going on at the local level because they're trying to reduce that 20 or 30% of the property tax bill that comes from the municipality's budget on their taxpayers. And so they're
mm,
cutting. They're having tough choices. And so that looms large on everything that is discussed in the state house, even though as VLCT, we're not in the debate, nor should we be about, what is the right, district and what is the right, but the outcomes affect what municipal government can pay for every day.
hmm Well, and I think municipalities too, when I just think back to a lot of the town meetings I've covered, um, a lot of education conversations I think also land before select boards because people see their select board more than they see their school board, and so they naturally, oh, this is the government, and so we talk to
Absolutely.
them. So even when it's something they have no control over, it often will
Absolutely.
still come before them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm
And so generally, our VLCT does a big municipal policy setting every other year to align with the biennium. And we have these big five policy committees, and we meet several times all summer, and we come up with pages and pages of municipal policies that the whole membership votes on.
hmm
But then every year we refine that to be our legislative priorities, which is a much smaller list of things that I try to tackle over in the state house. And so for this year, the large policy statement is to support municipalities in meeting the obligations and functions of today's government and take action on issues of statewide importance. And really for 2026, VLCT's priorities are to do anything we can to lower property taxes, which sort of plays out in our world of authorize and enable municipalities to raise local revenue,
Oh,
control
interesting.
expenses, and avoid state to municipal cost shifts. Um,
Mhm.
so there's a lot in that bucket that some of them are very nuanced municipal authorities. If we can't get the money from the state coffers or the federal coffers, let us raise those revenues. That's up to the voters in each municipality. But in Vermont structure as a Dillon's rule state, we have to seek that authorization from the legislature. We can't just do it on our own.
Right.
Of course, we have build housing. We've been last few years, our municipal survey, housing availability and affordability has been the top request. So we're supporting, the creation of new housing that municipalities need, that they've planned for. We had some big wins last year with the community housing infrastructure program.
hmm
Um, but that's front and center. Promote public safety. That's been an issue. And sort of, support municipalities in delivering the public safety and fulfill the state's obligation to deliver public health and human services. The
Mm,
unhoused population, the homeless, like the state really needs to provide some more help there. Bring on the number of emergency homeless shelters that are needed to meet the needs. That is specifically a state obligation. It was. Um, Changed in the 60s to become a responsibility of AHS, Agency of Human Services. Before that, really stepping back, municipalities did deliver some human services, and they had the old poor farms and different,
right.
all changed in sort of the modernization of sort of the state taking that role and creating institutions that helped. So that's present. And then the final one, which I think is actually is sort of the hidden crisis that
Hmm.
municipalities know very well, but is starting to get some attention at the state house, is transportation. prioritize
Right.
transportation, fund and fix the municipal roads and bridges that all Vermonters rely on, because it doesn't matter where you live in Vermont, which municipality, you're driving on local roads
Hmm.
and bridges. And the transportation fund has been losing money for years. It's not keeping up with the demand. Um, you know, in inflationary dollars, it's back to what it was in 2013.
Hmm.
And the state, oddly enough, is returning federal match. We're not raising enough of our own transportation fund to draw down 80% federal match. We only have to provide 20. And this year, it's expected that we could lose $150 million in federal transportation funds because we're $35 million short in our share. And so that is a real, we hear that from municipalities every day. Some of our smaller municipalities, the transportation budget is the roads and bridges maintenance is the largest part of their budget. And
So
it's what
true.
they hear complaints about,
Yeah.
potholes and the paving and the snow plowing and the back roads and so that is a real issue that we hope the legislature finds the will to address because transportation, like anything, costs have been going up. It's 40 to 60% above what they were just a few years ago. And so, the best time to pay for transportation was yesterday. The second best time is today, and we're not meeting those needs and leaving federal money on the table. And so
Hmm.
that just doesn't work.
And I think transportation is such a good example of what it means to run a municipality because on one level it is completely boring, like roads and bridges, nothing sexy there. And yet, like you said, all of us, especially in a rural state like Vermont, we've all got to drive the roads, and when they're not plowed or they got lots of potholes, we're all miffed about it. um and so walk me through when you talk about the legislature having the will to address the issue. What are some of the things from at least municipalities' point of view that would do that so that we
Yeah,
could reach our share and draw down those federal dollars?
yeah, so it's really interesting. The sort of our transportation revenue and the fund as it's designed depends on really three things that really don't make sense with our current priorities. As we've stated in Vermont, they depend on Vermonters buying expensive gas guzzling vehicles that drive a ton in the state of Vermont because
Mm-hmm.
we raise our money for our transportation fund from the gas tax.
Ah.
That's it. And so most of the policies I've seen have been encouraging people to buy more fuel efficient vehicles, to switch to electric and electric vehicle charging stations, but we haven't modernized how we pay for the roads and bridges. And even VTrans's budget shows that their repaving schedule is now 30 to 40 years out when it
Oh,
should be
wow.
10 years to repave roads. So it's really a pending crisis, and we need to modernize where we collect money for transportation. Um, 20 years ago, one-third of what they call the purchase and use tax. So when you buy a new vehicle, you pay a big sales tax, essentially. That all used to go to the transportation fund. But
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, they diverted a third of it to the ed fund to help with
Ah.
property taxes. And so over those 20 years, that about $50 million a year diverted to the ed fund would have drawn about $2 billion in federal match.
Oh my gosh.
And so you can see every time we've carved off transportation fund budget, it's really gone to support the ed fund, and we haven't made a new source. And so, 2, 3 years in a row, the transportation budget, transportation fund is not reaching its targets. We're not bringing in the revenue to draw down the full federal match, and it's really predicted not to change. And so, when I say find the will, we've got to return those purchase and use tax back to the transportation fund. Many of our municipalities are calling on the authority to raise transportation funds locally.
Mm-hmm.
Brattleboro, the Brattleboro rep down there, Molly Burke,
Yep.
she's put in a bill we support to allow municipalities to put a 1% option tax on gas and keep it at the municipal level to help with road maintenance. We've called for a practice that a number of other states do, where when you register your vehicle, a portion of the registration fee is remitted back to where that vehicle calls home to be
Ah.
used in transportation funds because many of our rural Vermonters, they own the most vehicles. They register the most vehicles. That means they're driving on local roads, and the heavy vehicles that pay a special fee, that also should come back to where those vehicles live and use those roads and create that damage. So when we say, find the will, we're open to any and all solutions that the governor and the legislature can agree to fill this hole because without any changes, it's only going to get worse and be more expensive. And it's really hard to dig out of a transportation network that is falling behind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have had my fair share of going through bridge reports or dam
Hmm.
reports from the state and feeling like, oh, not sure I want to drive on that bridge anymore now that I've seen
Right,
the
right,
photos of the underside.
right, right. Sure.
um, so that's interesting, and that raises a couple questions for me. But I'm going to hold on to them for the moment because I appreciate that deep dive in the transportation. I'd like to do something similar with health and human services because I think, especially down in this neck of the woods, for some
Hmm.
of our larger communities like Brattleboro, um, there is questions about the hotel motel program
Hmm.
and increasing homelessness and how do municipalities meet those needs. And I think many municipalities feel they can't. So I'd love to hear what you're hearing, what you see as solutions, that type of thing.
Yeah, and we've been engaged in this issue, for a few years now, and a number of municipalities got together last year and did a press conference and really called on the state to do more to help municipalities. We had a group of members, all from really, Winooski to Brattleboro and a number in between, that participated in sort of a policy setting committee all summer to develop our sort of public safety priorities. And it was really public safety, homelessness, opioid crisis, all those sort of things wrapped together because
Mm,
um, they all have a nexus. There's harm and challenges related with all of those. And so one of the things that municipalities are really calling on the state to help with resources to sort of remove hazardous materials from encampments and public spaces. We know that, folks are going to need to find shelter. They're going to need to take care of themselves. But the public also wants their communities to be safe and
hmm
to be cleaned up. And our municipalities don't have these other budgets to sort of deal with the way the state has, implemented the hotel motel program or closed it down and left people behind. And so we want some support with that. We also want the state to build and create more emergency cold weather shelters,
hmm
include opening state buildings or land sufficient to double the total shelter capacity statewide up to 1,200 beds. It's about 600 right now. Um, as we wind down the hotel and motel program, because that was largely funded with federal funds,
hmm
I was there at the time as housing commissioner when we had all of the
Oh,
COVID money
that's
pouring
right.
in, and we're able to be very creative with a number of our rental assistance, COVID money, and others to really put into that system so that we could keep people housed during that crisis. But as that's going away, we know the budget challenges, and so really calling on the state to adapt and make these investments. And if I hope we maybe don't need 1,200 permanent
Mm,
emergency shelter beds, but you can then wind them down as we don't need them. But this sort of push and pull and open and close, and this is happening this year, and this number of motels isn't really helpful for communities that, in the end, unhoused folks struggling are living in communities. They're
hmm.
not living in the state house, they're not
Right.
living in EHS field offices, they're in communities, and municipal leaders are bearing the brunt of trying to address those concerns.
Hmm. Um, thank you. So much to think about. I guess, one thing our conversation is just make in my brain, what I'm seeing is just this cobweb of
Mhm.
interconnected systems and reactions and responses and outcomes that do feel like they all kind of land at the local level. Um, so we have just a few minutes. This went so fast before we hear from some underwriters, and I just want to make sure um, ed reform. I want to
Mhm.
touch on that quickly because, like you said, it's something that towns don't have direct control over. But, is there, what are you hearing from communities? What kind of next steps do you as an organization see would help municipalities as far as ed reform and that whole
Yeah.
conversation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, many schools are, at the heart of a community. When I was in Rochester, Vermont, the high school closing was front and center, and I had kids in the school and was on the school board, and that was really challenging. Um, but also municipalities know the impact of not sort of finding a reform that controls costs,
Hmm.
or at least manages that in a way that isn't a direct impact to a municipality's budget because of the property taxes. That is the way that municipalities have been authorized to raise revenue in the state of Vermont, other than the 1% local option tax, which is great, and we're happy that more municipalities have been authorized to vote to support 1% local option tax, but it's not sufficient to run a municipal government.
Hmm.
But the property tax sort of squeeze, as residents, taxpayers, property owners are screaming for relief and support, really squeezes out anything that municipalities want to do new to sort of enhance their community, to add rec facilities, to add, firefighters and police officers, um, because they're competing with that rising property tax with, education costs growing. And so it really is one of these indirect but direct pressures on municipal government. And
Hmm.
so, municipalities are calling for a plan that sort of stabilizes this and makes the situation more predictable, because the outcome, and we've seen it. I was just reading a news report about delinquent property tax increases when municipalities, when property owners can't pay their property taxes, they become delinquent.
Hmm.
The other property taxpayers have to cover that share because the municipality still has to pay the state the full ed property tax.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so if we have an unaffordable property tax that property owners aren't able to pay in their municipal bill, the municipality still has to send the full property tax collection to the state. Everyone else that is paying, theirs has to go up to make that difference.
Hmm.
So we don't want to get to a crisis point where municipalities are seeing, 30% delinquent taxes or something like that, because the system could collapse. I mean, that's the worst case scenario.
Hmm.
Great story about the town of Cambridge, Vermont, in Lamoille County, a little small community. They've had flood impacts, they've had other issues. Their delinquent property tax right now jumped from I think $250,000 to currently they're holding a $500,000 in delinquent property taxes on their budget for a small town. And
That's
they're
right.
having to still send those property taxes in full to the state.
Hmm.
So it's not hypothetical. It's a real issue of affordability if property taxes can't be paid, that municipalities will bear the burden of trying to recover and make up.
Hmm. Um, Josh, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but it's always something that's kind of I've always wondered at. I sometimes look at our towns, and Vermont has gone through a lot of shifts around industry, whether we were relying mostly on farms or mills or what have you. And I sometimes wonder, is part of the crunch we're in, these towns grew up around, say, large farms, or they grew up around large mills, but a successful kind of, I'll say, commercial base.
Hmm.
And a
Hmm.
lot of our commercial base has gone away or shifted to, say, maybe tourism,
Hmm.
but we still have that infrastructure and those services in place. And I'm wondering if part of what we're feeling is this shift towards the residential side of the ledger having to pay more, and not enough industry. I'm curious. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great way to look at it. I think some of that, I think there is some of that. I think
Hmm.
in some of our communities they've lost an industry or a business commercial base that was vibrant and growing, and so those properties were assessed at a high tax value and kicking in revenue. It's interesting though because a community like a Stowe that has a very high rate of second homes, and they have a lot of visitor-based businesses that are feeding the ed fund. Their property tax imbalance of sort of how much the businesses pay and how much residents pay is helped by having a lot of businesses there. They're also
Mm,
paying property tax. So there is something to that. A community like, think of the old mill towns like Springfield or Windsor that
yeah.
lost some of that industry do have that challenge for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and it just makes, again, that cobweb in my head of all the interconnected, as you know, it's we need education reform, we need economic development. It's like we can't just pull one lever, it feels like.
Right, it's
Um,
all connected. And you hear those arguments play out in the ed funding, like, oh, we should switch to an income tax, go away from property tax. And then other people will say, well, that'll be worse. We don't have enough income. We have, high property values, and some of those are maybe second homes, or maybe they're, somewhat in property tax is stable because no one wants to lose their property. And so it's a challenge and it's a debate, and I'm not going to pretend to know the answer. I mean, we've got a lot of smart people working on this, and they're struggling. So I wish them well and hope that we can address this problem and put us on a longer term path to be more stable, and cost that Vermonters can afford. Yeah, I mean that's my hope.
Thank you so much, Josh Hanford. Folks, stay tuned. The Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW is going to hear from some underwriters, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here at WVEW LP Brattleboro. I'm your host and producer, Olga Peters, and if you're just joining me, I'm speaking with Josh Hanford, the Director of Intergovernmental Relations from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And we're talking about, we always say how Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us, and yes, a lot of that tends to shake out at the municipal level. So that is what we're focused on today, is the health of our towns. Before we dive back into the conversation, I just want to thank BCTV for taking the video version of our show and sharing it with media centers around the state, as well as remind listeners that the views and opinions of everyone on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the hosts and the guests, and nobody else, not the stations, not the platforms. I think you guys get the drift. Um, so thank you, Josh, for being here today.
Absolutely.
You mentioned in the first half of the show that you've been testifying in front of the legislature quite a bit. now that the session has restarted. Is there anything really kind of granular or really municipal specific that you think listeners should know about?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've done some big picture stuff on housing and priorities, but there's one testimony that's very specific, but actually, I think it's fundamental to sort of democracy and participation. But it's right in the realm of municipalities, and so there's a law in Vermont called the Public Records Act.
Mm-hmm.
It's where folks can ask for records from state government, municipal government. But it's a very old law, right? It was written in a time when records were quite different than they are today.
Mm-hmm.
There was a photocopy charge, and so things have changed. And so we've done some testimony to the government operations committees about, some current challenges that municipalities are facing, and some suggested modernization to that. Currently you have to produce the record within 3 days. You can only charge for copies. And there's been some cases in municipalities where there's been quite a large legal bill racked up, to the tune of $100,000 in responding to these records because other very good laws have made sure people have privacy protection and you have to
Mm-hmm.
redact information. And so often these records result in attorneys having to be hired to remove the personal information and produce the record. And, if someone doesn't take a copy, they just review it. There's no charge, as well as AI
Mm-hmm.
requests generating thousands of requests that are really meant to scrub municipal financial records
Yeah.
and RFPs and contracts for their own business benefit. And in fact, the records itself could be a malicious attack because you have to open the attachment to get the record. And now the municipal IT, and think of a small town that your viewers are familiar with. Do you think they have really sophisticated, expensive IT departments that are so it's become a real challenge to comply, and our reforms aren't anything to do with changing the intent of the law. It's
Mm-hmm.
fundamental to a free and open government and democracy, but really just modernizing and making sure that municipalities can afford the process and that there aren't malicious attacks and AI sort of bots that are really scrubbing and holding people, holding municipalities out for ransom. And these attacks are happening across the
Mm-hmm.
state. So that's a very in the weeds specific municipal issue that we're bringing up. But I know, as media sources, as everyday residents, they want access
Yeah.
to what the government's doing, and they should have access. And we feel there's a way to reform this and make sure it's done right.
Well, I'll admit, when I was on your website, I did see that. And of course, as someone who puts in public records requests, my ears did perk up because it's a two-way street. On the one hand, I feel for towns who are getting like malicious attacks, or sometimes people will just they're trying to dox, as the phrase goes. Um, but on the other hand, you also sometimes have municipal staff who are like, I don't want to answer any requests. And why are you asking? And you just want to cause trouble. And I'm not going to give you the information. So it can be a two-way street. And so anything we can do to make it easier for both sides, I think, is helpful. One thing I will just put out there for anyone who's listening who maybe is a citizen looking to put in a public records request, for what it's worth, I often, if it's appropriate, will put something in my request like, if this feels difficult, please call me so we can talk this through. And I will often find that the way I made the request may have been confusing, or I was asking for a spreadsheet, but they only have, Word docs or something like that. So it is worth it to have a conversation if it feels appropriate to you, because sometimes you can still get the information you need, but it can be in a way that is easier for both you and the municipal staff member. So just throwing that
Absolutely.
out there for folks.
Great advice. Yeah. What is it really you want?
Yeah.
Is it really all the 400 pages that this could be, or are you looking for the four that this, and it's interesting because we've done some research of other states because every state has a, public records law, open meeting law, FOIA, and Maine and Kentucky and a few others have what's called a vexatious request,
Hmm.
where actually a judge can determine if the request is really just to sow confusion and to stop the work of the municipality because it's actually a
Interesting.
battle about something else, and you can have a judge rule that nope, you don't have to honor it because it's actually it's meant for retaliation. It's meant to harm. It's not really after the information that they're looking for. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's interesting. We weren't aware of that in Vermont, the other sort of way that states are dealing with this. So yeah, but good
Oh,
advice. Yeah,
that's
try to get
interesting.
to the heart of what people want.
Yeah. Yep. Um, I'm just writing that down. You said Maine. That's curious. I'm
Yeah,
gonna look into that.
vexatious. I can follow up with you later with the actual citation of their law. It's actually in our testimony documents on the website.
Oh, okay. I'll go back and
Yeah,
look at that. Thank you.
yeah.
Um, Vexatious public records request. Sorry, listeners. My brain just went in like 14 different directions.
Uh,
hmm Um, so since I can't remember what my question was, we're just going to change topics now. I would love to pick your brain, Josh, about the concept of regionalization because it's, I think, something that's gaining more and more traction in around our municipalities, and it is something that, given our small size, can really be a wonderful way to create economies of scale. And at the same time, like I'm thinking of the Oliver Wyman report on healthcare that suggested consolidating or closing some
mhm.
hospitals. At the same time, I'm hearing from some folks saying we feel like our towns are getting hollowed out. If we lose our local hospital, we lose our local school, we lose our local basically third places. Um, I, it's both are right, neither's wrong. I'm just curious, what are you hearing from towns? What do you see as you're looking at the municipal landscape?
Yeah, it's a big question. It sort of strikes at the heart of our motto, freedom and unity, right? On one hand,
Mm-hmm.
we want to be, very independent and, have it all our own and be completely under our control. And then on the other hand, we realize maybe we need to join with other people and have a regional approach. And I think with the reality of a lot of today's world, there's an economy of scale that just works better
Mm-hmm.
when there's more involved. And we're sort of seeing it. You mentioned healthcare, schools. We see it in regional policing and in EMS service and, even road maintenance delivery. Like there's this conversation happening about regionalization. What would it look like? Vermont historically doesn't have county government per se, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
county courthouses and county sheriffs, but in many states, they have county government in between state government and local government, right? And so, what will work for Vermont? It's been a question kicking around for a while. Um, and there needs to be a more focused work on this to get it right. And the league is certainly wants to be part of that conversation, obviously, with our members. Um, I think a great test case might happen this session from your region, from Windham County.
Hmm.
The Windham County Sheriff has the Windham County delegation,
Yeah.
the Senate delegation, put forward a bill to look at a pilot project for Windham County to provide policing, regional policing.
Yep.
Many towns don't have a police force. They rely on the state police, which may be 45 minutes away, or maybe a county sheriff contract. And so the sheriff down there and some smart people of come together and said, "Hey, here's a way we could do it. It's a pilot. Let's see if it works." It's an regional approach that's voluntary. Municipalities can choose to participate or not.
Mm-hmm.
If they choose to, they each get a vote and they set the budget, they set the rules, and they provide this service. in a way that, hopefully it's designed to be better than doing it on your own.
Right.
Save money and have better services. And I think our interest in the regionalization discussion is about that. Can we get better services? Does it reduce the cost? Does it provide, new, better ways of doing things and not just adding another layer of bureaucracy that locals have to go through and not get any more and cost more? That wouldn't serve us. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to approach this. And we as a state haven't had those big conversations to say this is our preferred model, but it's
Mm,
coming.
hmm
All the things we've talked about and all the challenges all have an element of this. And really the question is, what level of government is best to deliver a particular government service? Whether
mm,
it's fire, police, EMS, uh, dispatch, school. There's so many different things in this conversation, and this regionalization cooperation approach might be one of the answers. Universally. And so it's important to get it right, not rush into it. And I think things like the pilot is a great way to say, hey, is this really going to work? Is this really the way we should do it? Could we tweak it before we go all in?
hmm
Because like you said, we all value our local schools, our hospitals, our institutions. And what would that do to a community if we decided, nope, it's better that that happens 45 minutes away from you? And how would that affect that community? So it's a big conversation. But to go right, it needs leadership. It needs leadership from the very top, the governor, the legislative leaders to say, hey, we think this is fundamental to better services for Vermonters that we can afford across a number of sectors. And so they're putting their shoulder behind it. And I think the jury's still out on whether they've lined up behind that as one of our answers in all these different sectors.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for bringing up Sheriff Mark Anderson's pilot project. I haven't looked at it since it's the legislature opened, but just so listeners know, I did report on it when he kind of rolled it out in one of his public meetings. I'll see if I can find the article and
I,
put it in the
I
show notes.
I think the bill is S-255. Don't quote
Okay.
me on that, but it's definitely a Senate bill and it's definitely 250, but I don't know if it's 55 or 50. I'll have to go
Okay.
look. But we're certainly paying attention to it and met with the sheriff and a few others and said, yeah, we're gonna work with you because
hmm
we want to understand if something like this is going to serve our municipalities better because something like policing, it begs the question, is it really a municipal responsibility when only a couple dozen municipalities have a police force?
Mm,
It's not universal, and we all can't afford it. And so it's a great way to sort of see if a model of cooperation and regionalization can work and work better and deliver what our municipalities want for their residents.
yeah. And I think one thing that was clever about it, the proposal, at least when I saw it, was he sort of grafted the pilot on top of an existing structure. Even though we don't have a lot of county government, we do have some. And so he grafted it on top of that. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel to do the pilot.
That was absolutely a smart way. Not create something brand new. And actually, it's interesting because the county government, the county budget, is something that right now municipalities don't have a say in. It's just
Hmm.
here's your percentage, add it to your bill. But this would change that dynamic a little bit. It would say,
Oh,
oh, okay,
interesting.
if you want into this regional policing, now you get a vote. Now you get a say in what the budget is and what they do. And so it's, in our view, sort of improving the system that we have now, where the county government is something that we don't have any input on what they do, what their budget is, and are just asked to incorporate it into your property tax bill at the municipal level. And if this moves forward, would give a chance to open that a little bit and have our municipalities, if they choose to participate, have some say in what the county budget is, what they do, what it costs, at least for policing at this point. So we're hopeful it gets some attention in the state house because it's worthy of it.
Okay, yeah, and I will look it up, folks, and if I can find the right bill, I will also link that in the show notes as well for all my geeky, dirty listeners out there. I want to ask you a devil's advocate question, Josh. And that is, in the first half of the show, we talked a lot about um, how municipalities need more resources. And one way they're looking to do that is to be able to raise more revenue locally. Right now, the state really limits how municipalities can raise funds. And most of it is, as you said, through property taxes or those local option taxes on sales, rooms and meals, or alcohol and food. Um, so I hear that, and I can see why municipalities are asking for it. At the same time, given how squeezed so many residents feel already, um, is it a little bit like trying to get blood from a stone? I mean, is that fair for residents to have to pay more? Throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it's one that I think when towns first debate this or hear about it, there is a little misconception that is going to be the result of this.
Mm-hmm.
The way local option tax works, you can pick, you don't need all of them, rooms, meals, alcohol, sales tax, you can pick and choose from a menu. And we want to expand that menu. For example, short-term rentals. We want to be able to add 1% local option tax just for short-term rentals. So the idea that many of our communities, do see visitors and vacationers, tourists, and with resources and more means come into our community, enjoy what we all love in Vermont, whether it's skiing or hiking in the, they have discretionary money that can help our budgets and their impact in our communities. And so you can tailor these 1% local option tax if you choose to really impact visitors more than residents, right?
Hmm.
Short-term, residents don't stay in short-term rentals. If residents are going to go out for a nice dinner, yes, look, they would pay that, but often it's folks coming in from the outside. So you can mitigate that somewhat. You're right. There's still some questions about taxing ourselves. Some communities say, well, we don't have any businesses. It's online sales too, right? People are
Hmm.
ordering things from Amazon every day. And so you have to weigh those cost benefits to your residents and their impact. But at the same time, if residents are, demanding, a rec program in their town or the sidewalks to actually not be crumbling and be safe to walk and ADA compliant, there's those two things don't happen without some sacrifice somewhere. And so it really is a discussion. That's why this is thankfully a lot of our advocacy put at the municipal level for their voters and their select board to decide what's right for them, whether to choose adding a local option tax or not, and where to place that tax and who's impacted by it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That brings me to my next question. And this, whenever local option taxes come up in my neck of the woods, of course, we border New Hampshire to our
Mhm.
east, Massachusetts to our south, but New Hampshire, especially with the no sales tax. What is the conversation for towns along the eastern side of the state around sales tax and thoughts in that conversation?
Yeah, no, it is a challenge along the eastern shore, if you will, of our state and the towns along the Connecticut River, because folks are close enough that they do have that option. And I'm sure people make that choice, and but also some smaller purchases, it's not that much of an impact, and so I don't know what the answer is really there, but I've been involved in community development and housing in Vermont long enough and worked for the Agency of Commerce Community Development, Department of Housing for 18, 19 years, commissioner housing for a while. And so know that many of the communities along the eastern side feel a little bit left behind,
Mm,
in some of this work that they haven't had the same chance to sort of for economic revival. And so, I think the state can make their, if they desire to grow and desire to have new economic engines, support them in ways grants and assistance and other things to maybe make up for some of that. Vermont and New Hampshire are different.
Mm,
It's just a fact. But yet in many ways we're really the same. I lived in New Hampshire for a little while, and we'll say New Hampshire has no sales tax, no income tax. But when you go to register your car, the registration is 10 times as much as Vermont.
mm,
The fishing license is more in Vermont. So they make up for it in other ways, if you're a resident of New Hampshire. And
right.
so I think you have to keep that perspective alive when we're really looking at things. They have a high property tax burden as well as Vermont. And so great questions for our lawmakers in Montpelier that represent their constituents and really the whole state to sort of weigh those plus and minuses of adding new tax burden. And certainly we understand that, as I talked about right at the beginning, the property tax burden is something that we really hear from our municipalities is one of their largest concerns because they feel they can't add any more property tax burden onto their residents on their
Mhm.
side of the property tax equation to do things that most people want done in a municipality. So that's a challenge.
Thank you. One last question, because again, time flies when you're having a good conversation. I'm guessing VLCT is keeping an eye on Act 181 and
Absolutely.
yeah, Act 250 reform. What are you hearing from towns?
It's great. I'm glad you brought that up because that has been a lot of discussion we've had in the legislature so far. I think the promise of Act 181, which was a reform to Act 250, where there's more exemptions and openness to development in our developed centers, our downtowns, in
Hmm.
exchange for some more um, conservation, more requirements in our rural areas. There's some challenges in the implementation. It was a very complicated law, going through lots of processes and public meetings and RPCs and mapping, and we're really early into it. But what we're hearing are really three things. One, in the tier 1A areas, that's where there's supposed to be complete Act 250 exemption. These are really our downtowns,
Yeah.
downtown Brattleboro, downtown Montpelier, a very small section of the state. Um, there's a lengthy process to get approval for that. And it's great. And if they get approval, the challenge is the law is asking those municipalities to now take over all of the state's existing Act 250 permits, even though within that area, Act 250 is now exempt. So it
Oh,
sort of sets up a municipality to do two sets of regulations. So we're asking for them to change that. Doesn't make a lot of sense that if your regulations are so good in Brattleboro, let's say for parking, you have very low parking minimums and you've really looked forward in the future of your needs, but yet you're asked to hold a permit, an Act 250 permit for an old project that requires more parking than your existing laws. It doesn't make much sense and can open
mm,
us up for challenges and liability. So that's one issue. The other is on the opposite end of the spectrum for our more rural communities where we don't want them to be frozen in amber in time.
yeah.
They have to be able to grow and have some housing as well. And the what's called tier 3, where there's new Act 250 jurisdiction really for any development. Currently, the draft is 200 square feet. So think a tool shed, a garden shed.
Mm, hmm.
So, a single family home, you need an Act 250 permit. And it really focuses one of the criteria is called habitat connectors.
Hmm.
And it's really focused where the problem is it's focused on roads that have tree canopy, 75% trees or more. And so some cases were class 2 roads, state highways, people that own property along there, if they wanted to add a house or a driveway, they would have to get an Act 250 permit to add a single home. We think that's going to really affect, especially the rural lower income folks that own
Yeah.
property and really devalue their property.
Hmm.
If they can't develop it into, a home or some small structure, that takes away some of the rights. So there's a bill from folks down in your region that put it forward, some of the legislators to at least notify people if this is going to
Hmm.
happen, that their property is going to have new development restrictions on it. Let them decide, let them at least know. And the road rule, which is the interior sections behind those road ways of
Hmm.
tier 3, where there's forest canopy. the two of those work together to really limit large swaths of our smaller communities. And completely understand the conservation side, and we want to protect our intact forests and want to protect our critters and not build on steep slopes and the wetlands. That's not the issue. The issue is if we can't build on the right along state highways where we have investments to sort of cluster homes and not impact the interior, then people are going to have to build long roads to impact the interior. And the two together, if they shut out rural Vermonters from the ability to use their property for, um, you know, pretty minor development, like a single family home, we think there's going to be problems. We think
Hmm.
there's going to be a sort of a devaluing of grand list property in these municipalities. If you can't develop it for really anything, it's got to stay conservation. Well, when that property changes hands to someone else and they know they can't develop it, it could devalue it. And what's that going to do to the grand list? And just equity.
Right.
Rural, low income, rural poor owners, is it fair for them that their property now is devalued and they can't use it in
Hmm.
exchange for the downtown increased development? I don't know if that's the right balance. So we're just asking those questions. We're not calling for it to be thrown out. We're just calling for a slowdown of the process. Let's slow this down. Make sure municipalities and the public and these landowners are informed and have a chance to comment and give their opinion before this goes into effect as early as this coming summer.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for that rundown. I have been hearing similar things from the more rural communities about tier three and what would that mean for our ability to attract
Mhm.
residents and grow as if we want to grow as well.
Right, right, yeah. Think of someone that's, whether they're farmland or forest land, and they've got some large rural property, and they've always planned to have carve off a couple acres for their kids to build a home so they can stay in their town. If that is really taken away, that could be really at the heart of what Vermonters feel is sacred to us, as being able
Mm.
to live on our land and have a rural way of life. And I don't know if that was the intention of this law, so we just need to slow down and really see if we make sure we get it right.
Well, and I think that as we're about to head out here raises something really important about operating municipal government or state government is sometimes you do need to go slow so you can propose something, see what the unintended consequences are, and
Hmm.
then move forward with hopefully something that serves even more people.
That's right.
That's my little
Sometimes
soapbox.
yeah. And sometimes we criticize how long it takes to get things done, but sometimes that's exactly what you want because you want to make sure you get it right and don't have these sweeping changes that no one can plan for or have input on. And we want a government that listens to us. So
Well, Josh Hanford, we are out of time. I'm sure there's so many other things we could talk to about, but thank you so much for being here from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and welcome back anytime. Thank you.
well, thanks for the interest. It's been a great conversation, and yeah, stay warm.
Thank you. Thank you. And as always, listeners, the Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW every Friday at 2 p.m., rebroadcasted on Wednesday mornings on BCTV, and of course, wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. Have a good weekend.